Mrs. Sloan? Mr. Hohauser? Mr. Baer? Mr. Greenstein? Mrs. Johnson? Mr. McDermott? Mrs. Nadolny? Thank you.
Before we begin the rest of the meeting, we are going to step away from the agenda for just a moment for Dr. Mooney to make a statement to the community.
There's an issue that has taken an inordinate amount of time and attention regarding Weber Middle School. The district has a formal statement. I'm going to read it for those of you who are not aware. It was posted on our website today, and it was also sent out to our parents. While we fully encourage children to participate in sports and other physical activities, that participation must be safe. The district is nearing the end of a construction project at the middle school. Because of the construction project, there's limited space for students to enjoy a 20-minute recess period. With children in such close proximity to each other, it is not safe for them to be engaged in unstructured play with hard balls. For that reason, the district has provided Nerf balls for this 20-minute recess period. Absent the confined space within which recess must temporarily, I repeat, where recess must temporarily be held, such restrictions would not be necessary. Despite the construction, middle school students still have many opportunities to participate in structured athletics with hardballs during gym and intramural athletics. In these more appropriate settings, there is less of a concern about an errant throw injuring a child. We appreciate the support of our community in our efforts to avoid unnecessary injury to what is supposed to be a brief 20-minute recess period. Let me be perfectly clear. As the superintendent, with the full support of the board, once the construction project is completed and the field is restored, the recess time period at middle school will be restored to its usual practice. Thank you.
I will make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, October 8th, 2013. Do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0, thank you. And we will now move to student and community comments. I would like to remind the community to please identify yourself for the record and that we will have only 3 minutes for each speaker. You will be warned 30 seconds before your time is up. We would remind everyone to please be considerate and respectful of that time limit because others might be waiting and we do have other business to attend to. So you will have one opportunity during each community comment period to speak if you would care to. And whoever is interested, please step up to the microphone. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joel Katz. Thank you for the 180 seconds. I bring you good news. The roof bond issue that was approved last May is not required. I've just had a chance to look at the audited financial statements for the school year ended June 30, 2013, and between that year and the year before, I note that between Mrs. Callahan's efforts and the board's efforts, you people created a surplus of $8 million, which flowed into the unassigned fund balance. Let me give you some quick figures. They're just terribly enlightening. By the way, congratulations in this very tough time. The unassigned fund increased by about $700,000. Not bad. It's $4.6 million at June 30, 2013. Total funds, by the way, congratulations again. Our total reserves, total $15 million now. They're up $1 million over the year before, June 30, 2012. And that's more congratulations because you did take about $1.2 million during the year June 30, 2012 to underwrite the subsequent year's budget. Last year, June 30, 2013, you took $1.4 million out of the unappropriated or the unassigned fund to underwrite the budget that for the year that we're in now. That's terrific work. But what's really scary is this, and I really don't know how to approach this. Something is really rotten in Denmark. If you look at the unassigned fund, you'll notice that during the year, or for the year June 30, 13, actual revenues came in over the budget by $2.5 million. In other words, we underestimated how much income we were going to have by $2.5 million. The year before you did that, it was $2.7 million. I'm a retired CPA. I'm an accountant. I spent a lifetime working on projections. I can understand when people are off in their estimates by $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, even $500,000. How in the world can you be off $2.5 million, $2.7 million in the revenues that you're going to collect? On the expenses and encumbrances side, this past year, June 30, 13, you overestimated those expenses by $800,000. Not bad. I can almost live with $800,000 because the year before you underestimated.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. Because the year before you underestimated expenses. I'm sorry, you overestimated expenses and encumbrances by $2 million. Doesn't smell right. We'll come back to the financial aid. My final word is this. I urge you folks, when you do get your hands on the financials, I think it's pages 9 and 10 or 9, 10, and 11. Look at those two pages. They're really key. And
3 minutes.
thank you, Mrs. Callahan.
Hello, Deborah Brooks. My daughter Hannah is here because my husband's in the city working late, so she's doing her homework. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm renewing my request for a resolution against high-stakes testing. I made the request to the board in May. I renewed the request last board meeting, and I'm renewing my renewal of the renewal of request. In support of that, I had to put on my lawyer hat, which I really didn't want to do, and go through the board policy. So policy number 4440, teaching methods, requires that the evaluation of the learning process, I say of the students parenthetically, should be relevant, purposeful, and informative for both the student and the teacher. I submit to you that standardized testing does not accomplish that. Under the federal education law that we call No Child Left Behind, 20 U.S.C. Section 6311B3, it talks about the academic assessment requirements, and that the requirements shall be valid and reliable. I submit to you they are not. That the assessments should produce individual student interpretive, descriptive, and diagnostic reports that allow parents, teachers, and principals to understand and address the specific academic needs of students. I submit to you that those standards have not achieved that, nor have the results. Also, that the standardized reports, the standardized tests should enable itemized score analysis to be produced and reported consistent with the statute to local agencies and schools so that parents, teachers, principals, and administrators can interpret and address the specific academic needs of students as indicated by the student's achievement on assessment items. Again, I submit to you that the standardized tests have failed to do that. I think it's a waste of money. I think it's a waste of time. Personally, I'd like to know how much money this district spends on the standardized testing of all the students. I personally have written to my senators, my assembly people. I am urging the board to do the same. Now, to move on, my daughter, my husband and I routinely check my daughter's homework, and there was one assignment where she was given an instruction on how to separate a word into syllables. And the rule was, when a word has two consonants between two vowels, the syllables are divided between the two consonants. One of the words she was
30 seconds.
One of the words she was required to separate into syllable was faster, F-A-S-T-E-R. So she followed the rule, and according to the rule, faster is separated between the S and the T. Now we all know that is not how you separate faster. It's faster. And the rule is when there's a prefix or a suffix, you have to separate the prefix and the suffix from the root. If this question appeared on a standardized test and my daughter was asked
3
to,
minutes.
may I just finish my comment? Well, I asked for leeway. I got leeway in the Supreme Court of the United States. I thought maybe I'd get some here.
Good evening, Dave Sattinger, parent of a Weber Middle student. I don't want to spend too much time on the social media outcry of today. However, I will say this, considering that we have a new security system, new security guards, that the kids in Weber are fenced in, and that there's an artificial turf field across the street and a track right across the parking lot, is it not too much to ask that kids that want to go play can go play? My son told me yesterday, I asked him, what do you do to recess? He goes, we just walked around and played with dirt. I said, why? He goes, well, there's a few Nerf balls out there, but there's 30 kids per team, and you're not going to see a ball if you have a chance. Today, as I wrote a letter to our principal at Weber about it, it turns out he came home and he got in trouble today. He got in trouble today for playing with a stick. He shouldn't have been doing it. He was horsing around with a friend. One or both of them could have gotten hurt. And I told him he made a mistake, and he admitted it. And I said, you won't do that again. He said, no. But he also lost recess the next 2 days. He was also held as they took his name and was late to his computer quiz. So I'm saying we could have a little bit more common sense here. These are kids, a lot of them, like my son, a 6th grader, just moved up to Weber. There's a lot of pressure. It's a huge adjustment. They need some time to run around and get their energy out. And to not even let them run around and play tag, you know, it just doesn't seem like we're being common sense oriented or problem solving here. It seems like we're more worried about liabilities and what our lawyers are telling us. And it's time to move forward. Finally, I'm looking forward to the committee reports tonight and hearing about how we've moved forward with long-term educational planning and a curriculum plan and how we're going to fund that in the future rather than worried about the year-to-year basis like we always do. Thank you. Have a good day.
I'm Rich Jakes. I'm the editor of Port Washington Patch, and I just want to state for the record that on Friday when I broke this story, I wasn't even trying to break a story, I got a question from a parent regarding, well, what they said was a student came home and they banned all balls at the middle school. So I called up the superintendent's office first thing in the morning Friday to try to find what the real story is. You never can get the whole truth from a child. So I left a message with the superintendent's office and just asked for some clarification on the issue. This is the third story I've tried to get some comment from the superintendent, and you refused to talk to me. I called back in the afternoon, and every time I call the superintendent's office, you're always too busy, you're on the phone, and I've always just asked for 5 minutes of your time to comment on an issue. At 1:30 or whatever, I talked to your secretary again. She wouldn't guarantee that anybody would call me back, and all I wanted was some verification on the issue. You referred me to somebody else in the school district, an assistant principal, who never stated after a 20 or maybe 30-minute conversation anything about any temporary arrangement. Never, not one time. And I ask you specifically to give me the straight scoop if that's what the scoop was. And I just don't understand how you as a superintendent couldn't have 5 minutes to talk to me about something that I thought was an issue that needed to be just explained to people who had a question about it. And that's all I tried to do as a journalist. And everything else that came back as a result of that, I think a lot of it is miscommunication because you're trying to get second and third parties maybe to give me an answer instead of it coming straight from the superintendent herself. And I just got to ask you, is there some special time in the day where you can arrange 5-10 minutes where you can talk to the media about important issues like this, or are you always on the phone, always busy, and never available to talk? And I will say at 1:30, after I called back and requested to talk to you again, your secretary hung up on me. And I wasn't really even being rude. I've got it all on tape. I just wanted to know who I could talk to and when. And to be adamant about the situation like you are today, I asked for the facts Friday. Now it's turned into a national media story, and it doesn't seem like the facts are even still out there yet. And I just hope we can talk one-to-one at sometimes when I have an important question. I don't even call you that much. There's maybe 3 times so far this school year, and I've never gotten a reply.
Good evening. My name is Dana Rochester, and I have 2 daughters in 1st grade at Daly, and I am enraged and outraged by the number of students in their classes and the lack of help for their teachers. One of my daughters has 24 students in her class, and the other has 25. 25 1st graders who are 5 and 6 years old with 1 teacher and 1/3 of an aide because she floats. This is a very different reality from the picture painted at kindergarten orientation, where we were told K through 2 is kept under 20 students. One of my daughters had no desk when we went to drop off school supplies before school started. No desk because that room is not meant to have 24 students. Her teacher scrambles to help the children pick out reading books to bring home because she has to help all those kids open snacks because she has no help in the class. Last year, my daughter's teacher told me she tried to spend a few minutes reading with her each day when she asked. My daughter had to beg her kindergarten teacher for 5 minutes of one-on-one reading time. Our children deserve better than this. I was told by the HSA that parents cannot even volunteer their time to help out because of union rules. 25 5- and 6-year-olds with 1 teacher and a floating aide, and parents cannot help. So you can understand my frustration. I have friends who are considering putting their children in private school, in part because of the large class size. I moved here from the city because I did not want to send my children to private school. I'm a physician, and when patients think they're having an adverse effect for something, I look for studies. I'm sure you're aware that Columbia's Teacher College studies done in the New York City public school system found that learning decreases in multi-level classes under age 8 when there are more than 20 students, that teachers have to spend time disciplining students instead of teaching them. The maximum in the New York City system for under 2nd grade is 25 students. With the taxes we pay in a Long Island suburb, I'm astounded that we are only 2 under that number. The largest randomized control study looking at the impact of class size on student performance in the US, Project STAR, also found a difference, that smaller class sizes produce lasting gains. Thank you.
Is there any further community comments at this time? Okay, we will close out this portion and have another one later in the meeting. For my comments this evening, I'd like to turn to a very happy and exciting event, which is really wonderful. Starting tomorrow, we will have our very first annual Unity Day celebration here in Port Washington. For over 5 years now, I've had the pleasure of being the co-chair for the Safety and Substance Abuse Task Force. It is a wonderful task force where many community members serve, district staff, administrators, teachers, guidance counselors, parents, concerned parties. And this year we are focusing a great deal on anti-bullying. And we are doing that with the belief that a lot of risky behavior begins because of victims involved in bullying. And we discovered that October 9th, through an organization called PACERS, is Unity Day, and we decided we should take part. And the idea is that the end of bullying starts with me, and each individual will be carrying that message. And in every school tomorrow, we will have requested that the students and staff wear orange if they have it. They will be receiving orange bracelets because orange is the color of Unity Day. And we will have activities all throughout the district. And we thought tonight you might like to see a sneak preview of something that was created in the high school and will be shown tomorrow in the high school. So I will introduce Mr. Ira Pernick, the high school principal and a very active member in the Safety and Substance Abuse Task Force, to introduce this video to us.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. I also want to add that all students in the district will be receiving a bracelet. It says Unite Against Bullying. There's also enough bracelets for all staff members in every school as well. We'll thank the guidance department for helping with that, Mr. Hardy in particular. We've asked all the students and all the staff members to wear orange in support of Unity Day and feel really good about it. We were able to here collaborate with our new TV studio to make a short video encouraging people to stand up and unite against bullying. I'd love to show it to you right now. It's really brief. I just want to thank Matthew Clemens, a student in the TV studio who helped put this together, did a great job on short notice. We have a great many talented students in this school, and particularly in editing and video recording, and we're happy to be able to provide them with the space to do their work. And we are excited for a really positive day tomorrow, and I invite anybody to come up and wear your orange. It's going to be a fun day. Thank you.
And there will be events taking place at every school, so whatever your home school, we hope you will hear about it and take part, and your children will be involved. And we hope tomorrow to be making the national news about Unity Day here in Port Washington. And now the superintendent for reports to...
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Yes, the district is very excited about Unity Day tomorrow. I believe that there are many, many messages about bullying that we can all learn from, and I know I have learned many, many lessons over the past day or so. So I have a great appreciation for what will be taking place tomorrow and fully support our students and our staff. I also just want to recognize and thank everyone who was involved in our homecoming on September 28th, as well as Pride in Port. It was an unbelievably fantastic day. Our football team won the game, and we're very proud of that. We're very, very excited to have 4 new inductees into our Athletic Hall of Fame, and it was just, there were just so many great participation from all our schools, the outside organizations, and the carnival for Schreiber was really well attended, as well as the games. So just would like to thank everyone involved, Stephanie Joannan, our athletic director, the high school administration, Dr. Fitzgerald, who is our liaison for Pride in Port, Julie Torres, who is the assistant principal, senior advisor. So it was an excellent job by, as well as all our staff and students who participated in the day. Also, just with regard to, we are going to be hearing about our audit report tonight, and I would like to not only give recognition to Mrs. Callahan and her staff, but in particular our treasurer, Rosemary Ruggiero, who is largely responsible for putting much of this information together for us, and she does so with great precision, and we thank her tremendously for her efforts. Just in terms of curriculum, our NWEA administration is underway, and we expect that to be completed within the next couple of weeks, and then our teachers will be looking at that data, which we believe will be meaningful assessment information regarding our students, and we'll be using that information to help inform instruction as we move forward in the school year. There has also been a tremendous amount of Common Core professional development that has taken place already, and we are intent on continuing that really technical in the classroom assistance for our teachers as well. I guess I'll turn it over to Ms. Fennick for the enrollment report.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. Good evening, everyone. As of October 2nd, 2013, we have 5,223 students a difference of 55 students from last year. Thank you.
I also just wanted to make a brief comment regarding the elementary class sizes. The board did modify the class size policy last year, and so unfortunately we did extend out some of the class limits. Regardless of that, there are still some class sizes that do exceed even those limits. On our October 22nd agenda, we will be having the board approve that. We were waiting for the enrollment to settle because it does take a few weeks before we feel we have a real accurate, and there have already been some slight changes. So we're very aware of the situation with class sizes, and we also look to both the middle school and the high school for those classes that are under 15 students and those classes that seem to be in excess of the policy as well. So we'll look at that issue at the next meeting. I'd like to turn it over for a moment to our student representative, Kyle Kalinda. Welcome back, Kyle, and I'll let you talk.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. The Schreiber students would like to thank Schreiber administration with their cooperation regarding the number of spaces for student parking, which is ongoing. There's a freshman parent meeting will be tomorrow 10/9/13 at Schreiber at 7 p.m. in the cafeteria regarding the guidance department at Schreiber. PSAT registration begins tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. in Schreiber lobby, which is also taking place during open house. There's a SEPTA meeting on October 21st at 7 p.m. on the insights into applying for the testing accommodations through College Board and ACT. There's a PSAT on Saturday, October 19th, and ACT Saturday, October 26th. Schreiber Guidance is expanding Naviance to notify students of college visitations to the high school. Later this month, freshmen will receive notifications that their Naviance accounts have been activated. Boys and girls cross country and girls swimming are all in first place. All of our other varsity teams are still in contention for a playoff spot. The football team remains undefeated and will play home versus Jericho this Saturday at 1:30 on the turf. And Breast Cancer Awareness Month will be recognized by our field hockey team this Friday and the football teams on Saturday. The rest of the teams will recognize it next week. Teams will wear pink somewhere on their uniform to promote awareness. And it being Fire Prevention Month, all elementary school students will have some type of awareness training done by the fire department fire marshal. Thank you, Dr. Mooney.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you. I will now make a approval of the minutes for September 17, 2013. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? All in favor? 7, okay, thank you. And we will now move to the discussion item. Mrs. Callahan, I'll turn it over to you to lead the discussion.
Thank you, Mrs. Sloan. For the benefit of the folks in the audience who might not come to this annual rite of passage, we do have an external auditor appointed by the Board of Education who on an annual basis reviews all of the financial books of the school district, not only those affecting you, the taxpayer, which is known as the general fund, but also our other funds, our cafeteria fund, our federal fund, our extra classroom activities fund, and this is a lengthy process. Last year's budget, the 12-13 budget, was $133 million, so as you can imagine, there's a lot to dig through. There was a lot for Rosemary Ruggiero to organize, to have in good order for the auditors when they came in. They don't come in just one time, they do come in during the course of the year and do some preliminary audit work, but then they come back and they spend 4 or 5 days here from morning till night. We leave them, or I leave them with Rosemary till about 6 o'clock every night. And the end result is the document that the board has received this evening. And we have with us this evening a partner from Dark Angelo Incorporated, Tricia Lucas. She is the individual who is the primary contact from D'Arcangelo and the partner who worked on our audit. So I would like to turn this over to Tricia, and after she has provided you with the overview of the report, it will be the opportunity for the board to ask any questions they might have. Tricia.
Thank you, Mary. Everybody should have the final copy of the final financial statements that were delivered to the district yesterday. I'm going to start with page 1. And I would just like to preface this conversation with the fact that we did have an audit committee meeting last week, and we discussed not only the financial statements but the management letter as well. So tonight I'm going to give you an overview of the financial statements. On page 1, this is the independent auditor's report. It has been redesigned from that of the previous year due to new clarity standards that were effective for the 12-13 audit. One of the more significant changes that you'll see on your end is the redesign of the auditor's opinion. They've broken out into different paragraphs and actually added some titles to hopefully make it a little bit easier to read. These financial statements are the responsibility of the district. Our responsibility is to issue an opinion on these financial statements. We performed our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. Government auditing standards are a little bit more stringent than the regular standards, and in addition, we did a separate audit of your federal funds. Because the district spent in excess of $500,000 in federal funds, you were required to have a single audit. The second paragraph up from the bottom is labeled opinions. This is where we give our opinion, and your financial statements present fairly in all material respects, which does translate to an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion. And that is what Port Washington is accustomed to receiving. The last paragraph on page 1 just states that there are 2 new standards that were effective for your audit, standards number 63 and 65. A couple of the more significant changes that you will notice is the terminology of net assets is no longer being used. It is now referred to as net position. And in addition to that, they have broken out deferred inflows and outflows of resources, which are a result of bond refunding. Port Washington not only refunded a bond in the previous year, but they also had one in the current year, and therefore you have both deferred inflows and outflows on your current year financial statements. Also included in the report is required supplementary information, which is required by GASB, and it includes the MD&A, a budgetary comparison schedule, and a schedule of OPEB, which is your post-retirement benefits. And then there are also several required schedules from the State Education Department. Those are included here as well. We're going to spend most of our time this evening in the management's discussion and analysis. This is the only place in the financial statements that gives you comparative information. The rest of the financial statements is a one-year presentation. If you turn to page 5, this details out in a consolidated format assets, liabilities, and your net position for the years ended June 30th, 2013 and 2012. You had total assets at the end of June 30th, 2013 of $99,016,000, which was a decrease of approximately $90,000. Your current and other assets increased by $826,000, mostly due to an increase in your cash balances of $1.5 million, which was offset by a decrease in your receivables of $800,000. Your capital assets decreased $916,000. While you did have additions of $1.4 million, that was offset by depreciation of $2.3 million. Your deferred outflows, again, that is a new line item on this report. Previously, it was included in the long-term debt. It is separated out. It has a separate line item now on the financial statements, and that is a direct result of the prior year bond refunding. Your total liabilities increased $7.2 million. They were $113 million in the previous year, and now they are $120 million. Your long-term liabilities consist of bonds of $44.1 million, your OPEB liability of $61.3 million, workers' comp of $2 million, compensated absences of $1.6 million, and then your energy performance contract of $1.6 million. You will notice that your long-term liabilities increased by $7 million. While you did decrease the obligations of your bonds by $4.5 million, you did amortize onto your books $11.8 million of the OPEB liability. Now, once again, that OPEB liability is your post-retirement benefits, and it is independently calculated by an actuary. We do take the numbers, we consider them a specialist, and we use those numbers in our financial statements. On the years that you send in your census data, which is every other year, we will audit the census data to ensure the accuracy of the data sent to the actuaries, because they do not audit that, but they do calculate your liability. Your net position is a negative $22 million. You have investment in capital assets of $26 million, which is your fixed assets offset by related debt and depreciation. You have your restricted net position, which consists of your reserves of $7.3 million. And then you have an unrestricted deficit of $55.2 million. One of the main factors of that unrestricted deficit is $61.3 million of your OPEB liability that is recorded on the books. Now, the OPEB liability is going to be amortized in over 30 years, and your total liability that the district is going to be amortizing in is a total of $193 million. Again, that is calculated by an independent actuary, and those numbers are used in these financial statements. If you would turn to page 6, in the middle of the page, this gives you a summary of your revenues and expenses. This is on a district-wide basis, so it does include all funds, and it also incorporates your long-term debt and your fixed assets. You had total revenues of $139.4 million, which was an increase of $3.4 million over the previous year, or 2.5%. The main reason for the increase is $2.9 million in taxes. You also had an increase in state aid by approximately $660,000 in the current year. Your expenses were only $1.1 million higher than the previous year. You'll notice on the instruction line item, that increased $1.7 million, or 1.5% over the previous year, and that is where you would expect to see the largest increase, because that's where all your contractual obligations are, your salaries and your benefits for all of your instructional employees. So overall, your expenses increased 0.8% over the previous year. Total change in net position was a negative $7.9 million. The next page I would like to review is page 9. This gives you a detail of your fund balances by fund, and it breaks it out into GASB 54 definitions of non-spendable, which is your prepaids and inventory, restricted, which would be your reserves, assigned consists of your encumbrances and your appropriated for subsequent year budget, and then your unassigned. In the general fund, you had non-spendable of $1.4 million, which consists of your prepaids. Your restricted, you have 4 reserve accounts: unemployment, retirement contribution, your EBLR, and your workers' comp. Your retirement contribution reserve increased $680,000 to $4.3 million. That is approximately 2 years worth of your ERS expense. That reserve can only be reserved, that money can only be reserved for the ERS. It is not allowable for TRS at this point in time. Your EBLR of $1.5 million, and then your workers' comp of $1.2 million. You had encumbrances under the assigned category of $155,000, and then the district did appropriate $1.4 million to the subsequent year budget, leaving you with $4.6 million in the unassigned category, which is 3.34% of your subsequent year budget. There is a compliance regulation that only allows you to have unassigned fund balance of 4% of the subsequent year budget to carry over into future years, and I'm happy to say that you are under that threshold at 3.34%. Then you had school lunch fund balance of $300,000 and minimal $50,000 in the capital projects fund, giving you a total of $15.2 million of fund balances for all of the funds together. Next page I would like to review is page 34. Page 34 gives you a summary of the OPEB liability. I would just like to take a few minutes to review this note. You had an annual required contribution in the current year of $17.1 million. That $17.1 million consists of the normal cost, which is the cost you incur for your active employees in the current year of $7.3 million. Then the amortization of the total liability, which you're amortizing in over 30 years, of the $193 million of $10.2 million. Then there's some interest, which I would like to clarify from our audit committee meeting last year. It's not interest because you've borrowed money and you're paying interest. It's the time value of money. Because this report is dated July 1st of 2012, it's a 4% rate that they're using to impute the interest on the time value of money for the current year, because this is going in the report as of June 30th. So the data that they're using is as of July 1st. So you had a net OPEB obligation at the end of last year of $49.6 million. You have an annual required contribution for the current year of $17 million. During the year, you paid $5.3 million, leaving you with the liability that's on your books at June 30th, 2013 of $61 million. Eventually, after 30 years, you will have the full $193 million, which is at this point in time, that will be amortized onto your books. Now that number obviously will change, but at this point in time it would be $193 million. As I stated before, you also have a single audit performed, which is the audit of your federal funds. And if you turn to page 47, this gives you an overview of the results of the audit. It reiterates you had an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. There were no material weaknesses and no significant deficiencies noted. And on your compliance opinion, once again, you did receive an unmodified opinion, which translates to a clean opinion. If you look at toward the bottom of the page, it says low-risk auditee. The district was considered a low-risk auditee, which means you've had clean audits for the past 2 years, and that reduces the amount of federal funding that we're required to audit. If you're not a low-risk auditee, we are required to audit 50% of your federal funds, but because you qualified as a low-risk auditee, we only had to audit 25% of your federal funds. And then down below on page 47, there were no findings for the current financial statement audit or the major federal program audit that were required to be reported in these financial statements. I would also like to note that there are required communications that we are required to make at the conclusion of the audit, and it is to report any findings or recommendations that we had. There were no current year findings or recommendations noted during the current year audit, and in the previous year there were 2 that have been corrected or implemented. One was a policy that was implemented back in November of 2012, so that has been corrected. And the other one was the budgeting process for 2 of the employee benefit line items that over the years the district has made significant efforts in being a little bit more accurate in the budget for those 2 particular line items. So overall, the audit went extremely well, and I'm also happy to say that there were no journal entries that needed to be posted. Of the 20 school districts that come across my desk, there are very few districts that there are no journal entries that needed to be made during the audit process, which speaks volumes on Port Washington's end, because that means that you have been receiving accurate numbers throughout the year. If we come in during our audit and have to post 20 journal entries, it should make you question a little bit of the accuracy of the numbers that you're receiving throughout the year. But there were no journal entries that needed to be posted. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I have the good luck, fortunate to be the chair of the audit committee, which is very exciting work, twice a year. And we had our meeting last week, and I guess I would just reiterate that, again, this is my second time doing it, that as I called her, Dr. Callahan, but it's really Ms. Callahan, and Marianne Ruggiero, and the business office in general do an outstanding, actually ridiculously outstanding job in terms of getting us accurate information. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome. There's a lot of awesomeness involved with that. From an audit committee kind of awesomeness. But anyway, so I just want to say that's a fantastic job, and it makes the audit process go well. It's a little cheaper because there's not a lot of journal entries to make and investigations. But anyway, and also the audit committee is made up of veteran people in the community who come and who've had many, many years seeing budgets, and they're fantastic to have there because they do ask good questions. I would just like to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is I'm going to ask you a question by making a really long statement and then maybe trying to come up with a question at the end of it.
Okay.
But the OPEB, which is the other post-employment benefits, really is essentially health care and dental and basically healthcare costs that we're incurring. The number is $193 million, right? And it's an actuarial estimate.
Correct.
We are slowly amortizing that onto our books now as part of a GASB requirement that occurred a couple of years ago, or went into effect a few years ago, 4 years ago?
Approximately 5.
5 years ago. So we're $61 million into amortizing this $193 million cost. And if you could just explain what is actually $193 million? Did we borrow $193 million from somebody? Or if you could just help me understand what that is.
That is basically a book entry. It is unfunded, which means there is no mechanism for funding this liability, so you cannot put money aside for it. And it is a liability that quantifies the benefit that you offer your employees upon retirement for health care benefits.
So it's only after they retire. That number is really just...
They're calculating it using the actives and retirees. They're calculating out the liability that you are going to owe once everybody retires.
Okay, so it doesn't include the healthcare costs of people who are actually working here at the time.
It does include that, yes.
It does include that?
Yes. If you look at the report, it does include actives and retirees. They're projecting what your estimated liability will be once all these people retire.
Oh, so it's the liability for healthcare after they retire?
Correct.
But not during while they're working here?
Correct.
Okay. And then, do we really owe this money?
Eventually, you will owe it once people start retiring. So right now, the contribution that you made during the current year, the $5.3 million, I think it was, includes not only the premiums that you paid for your current employees, but the premiums that you paid for the people who have retired and who are receiving this benefit now. So do you owe that money right now? No, because these people some of these people are not retired. But eventually, they're projecting how many people will retire, based on ages and how long they will live and what the healthcare costs will be in the future.
All right, and then I saw that there's something called the normal cost, which was like $7.3 million. And how does that compare to the money that we paid, the contributions made this last year, where actually we made payments to, I assume, healthcare companies or to healthcare providers? $5.3 million. How do those two numbers compare to each other?
The normal cost of the 7.3 versus the contributions made of the 5.3. So you contributed 5.3 million, but they're projecting out that your normal cost, and again, it's projections, would be $7.3 million for actives and retirees.
So would a good way to look at it be that this is kind of how you get to $193 million, that this last year, actuaries would say that we really had $7.3 million in healthcare costs or liability, but we only paid 5.3 this year. So kind of, is that a way that 193 number gets bigger and bigger?
It is, and it keeps compiling.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
One more question. I know that there was a mention, so that's healthcare liability. It's kind of an unfunded liability, right? Because there's no mechanism where we couldn't really create there is no fund available that we could start accumulating 93 million bucks against that liability, right? Can you talk about what's coming down the pike in terms of unfunded pension liability and having to account for that?
Sure. GASB 68, which will be effective for your 15-16 fiscal year, is going to require you to start recording your unfunded liability for pension costs. The OPEB is health costs, and GASB 68 will now be pension costs. You are part of 2 retirement systems, ERS and TRS. Those plans are not fully funded, and there is going to be some actuarial calculation that will be performed over those plans and somehow allocate the unfunded portion to all of the participants in that plan. That unfunded portion is going to be what is required of the district to start putting on their books in the same fashion as the OPEB.
There has been a perception among some people that we are really fully funded for pension liabilities, just because, you know, our pension expense every year, or the way we look at our pension expense, is really just a percentage of, I guess, pensionable salary or pensionable, you know, dollars. Or there's a formula that we're given, and based on the salary, we multiply the salary by this percentage, and we write that check to the people who manage the pension, ERS or TRS. But there's this assumption or a perception that we're fully funded because, you know, when that person leaves the district, then we don't have, or when they retire, I should say, when they retire and start receiving a pension, we no longer have to pay for them. So I guess the perception is that we're fully funded. You mentioned that it's not fully funded, so can you explain that, or is it too hard to explain? Or?
Well, if you look at the financial statements, which I actually printed a copy, you can see that neither plan is fully funded. The net benefits available for participants is lower than the actual assets in the plan, so they are not fully funded. And my perception on when people retire, you no longer pay for them. I believe that if the plan needs additional money, it's built into your current year percentage. So you may not be paying directly on those retired employees, but the percentage is calculated to figure out how much in benefits you need to pay out.
So the remaining employees, they would just increase the rate, and then based on that, the total salaries that you have then, it might be a little higher rate, but you'd be paying for.
It is very complex, but yes, that's incorporated into that.
All right, and then the last question I have is I know it's a few years out, but is there any remote ballpark estimate that they've been giving out for, you know, as guidance for districts yet? And if not, when do you think we'll see it?
Unfortunately, I do not have any sort of estimate for you. Not only does it take into consideration the unfunded portion of the plan, but then it's got to be allocated out to all the participants. So that information is not readily available, or I don't have that information. And again, it's probably going to have to be actuarially calculated. I'm not exactly sure when they're going to be doing that, but as time goes on, more guidance will be released.
Well, great. That's it for me. And Mary Ann and Mary, really, you guys rock the business office when it comes to the audit time. Makes it fun. As you know, again, depends what you like for fun. But thanks again.
Chris, did you have a question?
Hi, thank you for your report. I did want to just ask your opinion, if you could comment on our reserves and compared to other school districts, how we fare.
Turning to page 9, this does give you a detail of your reserves. The total general fund balance is $14.9 million, which is approximately 11% of your budget. As Mary has stated in the past, Moody's always gives a threshold of 15% of what they would typically like to see as fund balance in the general fund, so you are at 11%. Your reserves are in line with your expenditures. As I had stated before, your retirement contribution reserve is approximately 2 years' worth of expense. We like to use a threshold of 2 to 3 years in that reserve. There is no specific guidance on that, but we usually tell our clients 2 to 3 years' worth of expense. Your EBLR is 1.5 million, and your compensated absences are 1.6 million. So the EBLR reserve is just strictly for compensated absences. In years past, the comptroller has kind of cracked down on how much can be in that reserve, and you are in line as far as that reserve is concerned as well. And then you have workers' comp of 1.2 and unemployment of 207,000. So your restricted is 7.2 million, and your unassigned of the 4.6 million is in line with the, actually it's below the 4% threshold that the maximum that you're allowed to have to carry over. It's the 4% of the subsequent year budget, so 4% of the 13-14 year.
And as far as the other districts that you've seen, how do we compare with our reserves, in your opinion?
You are in line with a lot of other districts. There are, I probably have half and half. Half of our districts are over the 4% regulation, and I would say half are in compliance with that regulation. As far as your reserves, I feel like you're in line and you're very comparable with a lot of districts. And again, with the 4%, we're seeing some over, some under this year.
Here we go. Regarding the assumed time value of money that I think is quoted on page 34, that struck me when I first looked at this. Why the 4%? Is that something that's mandated, or is that an industry standard?
I will say we see 4% on just about all of the actuary reports that we've seen this year. Those are assumptions that they use in their calculation. That's nothing that we give them guidance on or even consult with them on. It might be wise to maybe contact the actuary, maybe have them come in and do a presentation to the board on, you know, the assumptions that are used and why they use them. But we do see that that is standard in
So it's an industry standard rather than something that is foisted upon us, for lack of a better word.
Yes, we are seeing 4%.
And what has that been a change from recent years? Is it lower or greater?
No, as far as I recall, it's pretty consistent.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, there we go. I just want to go back to the 190,000. What happens with the mechanism when we reach 190,000? Is that an asset listed on our books, or if it's only a book entry, what actually happens with it?
The 190 million?
190 million, right, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Right, really, the interest on the money.
Basically, it quantified for you the true liability that the district is incurring over the years by offering these benefits to employees upon retirement. Will you have to pay out $193 million in 1 year? No. It's going to be paid out as people retire. You cannot fund it, and it is not an asset. It is a long-term liability that you are going to pay out over the years. So what it actually does is it kicks you into a deficit net position, which we're seeing year after year, and that deficit net position is just going to be getting larger and larger as the years go on.
But is it presupposing anything? Like if we were to terminate operation, is that what it's basically outlining? That this would be your long-term liability if we cease to function as a going concern today? We would potentially owe to everybody who's employed $190 million over forever worth of benefits.
Well, the $190 million does take into consideration the active employees that you have now that may not be of retirement age or may not qualify for retirement, but it does take them into consideration to quantify the entire liability. So I guess if you were to cease operations tomorrow, some of those people would not be eligible for retirement benefits, which would be these OPEB health benefits. You would owe part of that to the employee or to the retired employees.
And if it's a book entry, what prevents us from booking the 190 million in 1 year and being done with all these calculations year after year? Other than that, we would be in a tremendous deficit at that point, which we will slowly bleed into anyway. So whether we do it over 30 years or we do it next year, the same ultimate figure more or less is going to arrive on the balance sheet.
You're correct in that statement. Other than you would still have to have an actuary calculate that liability in the same manner that they're now calculating it, only you wouldn't have that amortization piece because it would fully be recorded on your books, and it would only be the normal cost that you would be adding to that number on an annual basis.
And the normal cost is then actually our out-of-pocket physical cost that we're paying to the state of New York for any of those services.
No, that is the contributions that were made. So that was the 5.3 million. That is your actual cost that you paid out in the current year for active and retired employees. The normal cost is that plus what they're calculating for those active employees that will be their retirement benefit.
And that's the $2 million difference between the 7 and the 5.
Yes.
And that's a non-cash item, but just a book entry. Okay, thank you.
And that does not affect your fund financial statements. I would just like to point that out. That has no effect on your general fund balance. This is a district-wide entry that is made only on the district-wide financial statements when you incorporate all the funds plus your long-term debt, which is where the OPEB comes into play, and your fixed assets.
So ultimately projecting out, if we booked the 190, where we're now minus 21 million, I think it was, with 60 million accrued, we would be minus 150 million per se. And ultimately, we would just stay in that financial position for the next 20 years, theoretically, unless we raise the asset side somehow because land went up or our buildings were fully depreciated or whatever. Okay.
I would say, well, we would stay in that position, but every year you'd be adding the $2 million or whatever the difference is between the normal cost and then the contributions that you made every year. So.
Just like to thank you for coming here tonight and having this presentation. I'd like to thank Vernon for chairing the audit committee. You do a wonderful, wonderful, awesome job. And I would really like to thank Mary Callahan again. We can't thank her enough. She is an unsung hero in the district. We usually hear about her around the budget time when people are yelling at her, and she is always a voice of calm, and we all sleep better at night thanks to you and the office you oversee, everyone in your office. So thank you again, because it's due to you that we have this wonderful report again. So thank you, Mary.
My staff really makes me look good.
Thank you.
And we will now move to committee reports, policy and personnel. Mrs. Johnson, are we tabling the reading this evening? If you want to talk about that now, or we're not, whichever you're going to tell us.
Okay, couple of things. We were going to present the new social networking policy, the draft policy, I should say, up for a first reading for tonight. Procedure would be, take comments tonight, and then a second reading at the next meeting, and then we would vote on it. But we've just decided to take another 2 weeks just to tweak a couple of items on the policy. Nothing major, it's just that it's a brand new policy for us, and we'd rather come in with as good, putting our absolute best feet forward before we present it. So look for it at the next board meeting. Regarding the Policy and Personnel Committee meeting, we had a meeting yesterday morning, at the teachers' cafeteria because we expected a large crowd, which we did have. One of our goals on the policy committee for this year, one of our 3 goals, I should say, is to review the practice of how teachers in the at Schreiber and at Weber return, whether they're returning tests, what the practices regarding the return of tests, I should say, and as well as research papers, and work towards modifying that if necessary. We had our first meeting on that topic, and we were very fortunate to have department chairs from science and math departments from both Weber and Schreiber, along with the principals of those 2 schools and members of the community. We had a lively discussion and followed by some questions and answers. Our next, and it was a fact-finding, a dialogue. Our next committee meeting will be on November 8th at 8:30 a.m. I'm not sure if it will be at that meeting, but in the near future, we will also be meeting with department chairs from social studies and English departments from the schools. Thank you.
Okay. Budget and facilities, Alan?
We did not have a meeting since the last board meeting, but the next meeting is scheduled for the 21st of October, 8:30 at the Daily Annex. We will be reviewing our best guesstimates for the next 5 years of revenue, long-term costs, to try to gauge our financial position over that 5-year period and how that will impact the educational effort within the district and where we may be plus minus neutral. We'll also be looking at use of our assets, including parking facilities, and also looking at other ways to raise money. One of the things that we've been looking at is support banners being put on the turf field and other parts from some local stores in support of Port Washington athletics, and to see how that might also generate some money. We'll also be again reviewing the facility policy just to make sure that we're keeping up with it. There have been a couple wrinkles that continue to develop as it rolls out. We want to make sure that we're staying current with all of the organizations that we have in town who use the facilities. And that's pretty much the agenda for the 21st.
Curriculum, we met on Friday, September 20th, and we basically had a discussion based upon our goal of assessment to talk a little bit about the state assessments, the NWEA, which is a new diagnostic tool that we're using with our students, which is a change from the tool we were using last year. And it's a computer-based test that varies the questions depending upon what the student's strengths and weaknesses are, and informs the teacher so that they can inform instruction, which led into a discussion of formative versus summative tests, and that tests are a good assessment is a tool for the teacher and the student rather than just a rote collection of data. We discussed a little bit that the testing is, in a lot of people's mind, is being conflated with the Common Core, and they are 2 separate things. Common Core are a bunch of standards that students are expected to meet. The testing that the state is using to measure the Common Core is a totally different animal, and a lot of it, where there can be some discussion, most of the educators seem to think that there is a decent amount of good things that can come out of the Common Core as it's being implemented, but that, you know, sometimes the heavy-handedness by which we're being forced to do some of the assessments on it is sort of tarring that also. Our next meeting is going to be on a Thursday, not a Friday, the 24th of October, and we're going to be talking about looking at enrichment, which is another one of our goals for the year, and we're also going to be guess, talking a little bit about what a formative assessment is and getting a little bit of data on how we structure those within the district. And everybody is welcome.
I'd just like to remind everyone that we are really operating successfully by board committee, as we have really been supposed to do for some time, and a lot of great work is done there. They are open to the public. The meetings are posted on the website. The agendas are posted. The minutes are posted. We'd love to welcome more people to attend, so please feel free to be there. We welcome you. And we will now move to the action items. I'll make a motion for A1 through D7, pulling B2. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0. Okay, thank you. I will now move to item B2. Accept a donation from the PWEF through the kindness of the Slade family in the amount of $50,000 to be used for the expansion of the high school's television station, DOTV. Do I have a second? Mr. Bear? I would just like to say we have a lot of generous donations in this community from a lot of generous people, but a donation from this size, has allowed us to move forward and do incredible things with our TV station, so it was worth noting and giving special thanks. Call to question? All in favor? 7-0. Thank you. I would recognize that the Slade family is in the house, but they would kill me, so everybody just turn around and peek. We will be waiving or tabling for tonight the first reading of the board policy. Do we have any old business? New business? We have another opportunity for the community to be heard. We ask again that you would identify yourself for the record and please keep to the 3-minute limit.
Hello, I'm Robin Sigmund. I'm the president of the PWEF, and I'm speaking on behalf of our board. And I'm here to recognize two outstanding members of the Port Washington community, Dot and Ed Slade, whose ongoing support of and generosity toward the Port Washington Education Foundation has resulted in so many innovative, effective, and compelling programs that make a huge difference in our children's education here. Their major gifts include the supporting the Port Washington Education Foundation Support Center for at-risk third graders who are tutored by Schreiber students, the Slade Performing Arts Center behind this auditorium, the creation of WDOT Radio, and now the investment in Schreiber's TV studio, which is poised to become, like these other programs, an integral, long-lasting part of the Schreiber experience. These different programs reflect the myriad of interests of the Slades, but have one thing in common: expanding learning experiences. They've truly given the gift of education, and we thank them for that. We also thank all of the administrators, the Schreiber principal, the Schreiber teacher, Peter Koch, who is making this happen. Everybody has been incredibly supportive and collaborative, and that's what makes a program like this the success it will surely be. So we just wanted to say thank you very much.
Hi, Dave Sattinger again. First, I want to say thanks for the great presentations today. It seems like we had some nice, accurate numbers, which is fantastic. I also want to say that the numbers are pretty daunting for the future. That's 193 in medical liabilities. We don't know what the pension is, and it calls into question what I've been saying for a long time, that we've got to figure out how to plan for the future. I'm really glad, Mr. Bear, that you are going to look at 5 years down the road. I would like to suggest to Mr. Greenstein that while I appreciate the curriculum committee has a lot of discussing that needs to be happening on testing, core testing, all of the training that's required, and whether or not these state tests are worthwhile, whether we should be taking them or not, perhaps it's time we look at creating some type of forum where these discussions could happen on the internet and focus more long-term on setting a path for the future to where we need to get educationally to create a long-term plan so we can figure out how to fund and meet the needs of the students. There's a lot of debate about what's going on right now, and it's all worthy debate, but it doesn't help us lead towards the future if we're talking about what we're dealing with. What we have to do is to provide the blueprint for the future, and I would encourage you and the curriculum committee to do a lot more of that, because then we can have a path and an understanding of how we're going to fund it. Clearly, we have to do something about our liability costs down the road, and we have to know how we're going to create that blueprint, and you know, everything has to come together in one piece. Regarding what happened with the Port Washington News and Dr. Mooney, I just want to say this. We all make mistakes. Maybe one was made, maybe one wasn't. Honestly, that's the point. Is if there was a mistake, whether or not we plan to do this permanently or not, who cares? Let's just solve the problem. Transparency is important. It's important for us to know where we're going as a district, and that when mistakes get made, we take accountability for them and we move on.
30 seconds.
And I would like to see that happen. And in the future, when we're going to have budget presentations like this, it would be fantastic, speaking of transparency, if those numbers were available to the community in advance of the meeting so we could peek at them, look at them, try to digest them, and have an understanding of where we're going. I felt like I could have been followed a lot more closely tonight if I had had those in advance, and would appreciate that in the future. Seems like the district's had those numbers since August 23rd. Thanks very much.
Hi, Judy Epstein. I'm a Schreiber parent. I was mostly sitting back and trying to understand tonight's presentation. From a completely lay perspective, I don't get along that well with numbers and balance sheets, so Vernon, I'm going to ask you to explain it to me. I think, well, that $193 million number sounded pretty terrifying to me. And I know this district works really hard to know what the numbers are, to balance them, to get them, to tell the community this is why it is what it is. And that number just blew the top right off my head. So everything else sounded good, but if there's a way, and what I understood of it, which is probably wrong, is this is a projection out into the future. Nobody knows what healthcare is going to cost. I think that's a pretty safe assumption looking at Washington. But they've picked some numbers and looked into infinity, put a price tag on that, and said, and by the way, you can't do anything about it. That doesn't sound very useful to me. So whatever useful can be said about it at some future time from the board or from Mary or from anybody else, I look forward to it. That's all I wanted to say.
If I could just make a comment that was said by one of the audit committee members last year. It was, well, Mary, it's the same thing. If you have two children, the minute they're born, they're a liability. I said, what do you mean? Well, you're going to pay for their college education, you're going to pay for their weddings, you're going to pay for X, Y, Z, all the way along. The number is unknown, but you have that obligation because you have that child now. And in a very simple way, to me, that made a lot of sense about this obligation, because we are obligated. We're calculating 35-year-old individuals based on actuarial assumptions as to how many years they're going to live after they retire and what the insurance premiums are going to be up until the time they die. So it's a very frightening number, but in fact it is a number that does talk to us about a liability, some of which we know, some of which we pay for annually, and some numbers going down into the future. And the frustrating part, at least to me, is that if the state gave us the legal opportunity to start saving for part of that future college education and wedding, I would feel a little more comfortable that I would be better prepared. But right now, the state has not given us that authorization. Thank you.
Rich Jakes, Port Washington Patch. Dr. Mooney, that was a really clear and concise answer and description that you gave to the situation at Weber. It was the exact same answer that I requested that you give me Friday. Take 2 minutes of your time, clear up the situation, and just tell me exactly what's going on, so there's no confusion. My question to you, or the first question is, why didn't you give me that exact same answer Friday in 2 minutes of your time?
We don't enter into discussion. It is procedure long-standing at the board meetings. So if you want to submit your questions to the superintendent in writing, she will try to respond to you in a very timely fashion.
Okay, then I have a couple more minutes. Another question, I guess, can I ask the question at least and maybe get a response tonight? It's regarding Halloween. I dealt with the school district last year that banned Halloween costumes at an elementary school. And I just want to know, could be doing a story. I want to know if there's anything specifically in terms of Halloween costumes that the school district this year, will not allow, or how does a parent, I don't even know if the school district's going to have Halloween costumes at all. I guess that's the first question. And if they do, how does a parent know what's allowed and what's not allowed? I know we go overboard, not to offend anybody here. Where could people find that information?
As we said, if members of the press want to submit questions in writing to the superintendent's office, they will be answered in as timely a fashion as her other responsibilities will allow. If there are no other comments at this time and nobody really wants to see the video again, we are adjourned.